Good evening and welcome to the sixth part of my lecture on Final CA audit. In the last lecture, because my laptop got hung, so I had to wind up the lecture within 5 minutes. So I'll be repeating SA300 and also be lecturing on 315. So SA300 is planning and audit of financial statements. Uh, as I mentioned before, planning and audit of financial statements basically deals with two parts. Okay, these are summaries. Again, I'm repeating, not the detailed essay. You'll have to again read the summary in Surbi Bansal before you completely follow this. So planning and audit of financial statements deals with two parts, for initial audits and for recurring audits. Now, initial audits, the auditor will have to first communicate with the previous auditor, that is, whatever the requirements of the quality control are there in SA220, and you'll have to take acceptance from the previous auditor whether the quality control requirements are satisfied or not. So that is for initial audit. And if it is a case of recurring audit, then here we have two activities. We have preliminary engagement activities and planning activities. In preliminary engagement activities, the auditor has to take three parts: continuance of client relationships, whether he wants to continue the work over there. That will depend whether the terms and conditions are being satisfied or not, whether his ethical requirements are being satisfied or not. There is no ethical conflict, the auditor has independence, etc. And the terms and conditions of the audit have been accepted by the management before the auditor takes up the job. So, continuance of client's relationship, ethics, and the terms of the audit engagement. These are covered under preliminary engagement activities. And under planning activities, we have strategic planning and other planning. So, under strategic planning, the auditor will have to consider factors such as use of knowledge of the business. What knowledge of the business does he have, like characteristics of the business, the reporting objectives of the business, any results of the knowledge of previous audit activities which he must have carried out from other engagements, the nature, timing and extent of the audit procedures, and so on, right? And this is strategic planning. And in other planning, he'll also have to document SA315 and 330, that is auditor's response to assess risk and risk of misstatement in an audit of financial statements. So 315, 330 also have to be considered over here. So two parts, right? Initial audits and recurring audits. Initial audits, as I told you, quality control, that is SA220 has to be satisfied, he has to communicate with the previous auditor. And recurring audits. In recurring audits, you will check preliminary engagement activities and planning activities. In preliminary engagement activities, you'll have three parts: continuance of client relationships, ethical requirements are being satisfied, there is no ethical conflict, and the terms and conditions are agreed. Planning activities, you'll have strategic planning, other planning. Strategic planning, you'll check use of knowledge of the business, nature, timing and extent of policies, etc., etc. And you have other planning where you check SA315, 330, and all of this has to be documented. Now coming to SA315. So what is SA315? Identifying the risk of material misstatement. Now, material misstatement may exist in the entity. So first you need to understand the operations of that entity, right? So you will understand the entity and you will understand the environment around that entity. That is the business processing, functional processes inside the business, as well as the regulatory environment, the cultural environment, the ethical environment in which the organization functions. So the auditor over here will use his knowledge from other engagements and from previous audits, right? He may use that knowledge effectively. He will discuss within the audit team what analytical review procedures he has adopted. Analytical review procedures, as I mentioned, are financial ratios, analysis, like debt equity ratio, to gauge or judge the financial performance of the entity. And in the entity, what will he study? He will study the industry, the regulation, the nature of audit, financial process, the business risks involved. So this is what he will study about the nature of the entity. Then he might want to study the environment of the entity. What will be in the environment of the cultural environment, the ethical environment, right? All this will form a part of the environment of the entity. Now, there are risks associated. What types of risks are there? There are significant risks. There are information technology related risks. And of course, risks have to be revised. So, in case of there are complex transactions, there may be a risk of fraud, which the auditor will check. For incomplete and inaccurate processing of transactions, there is another level of risk which the auditor has to study. And if the auditor feels that there's a revision of risk, he may revise the risk at the assertion level. So again, the financial statements at the assertion levels have to be studied clearly. After conducting this careful study, the auditor will want to document the engagement partner, the key members in the engagement team in the documentation part of his report. Okay, so we dealt with SA315 as well. I'll just show you the summaries from where I've been teaching you. This is how your summaries should look like from Surbhi Bansal, exactly from where I'm teaching, right? This is on page 1.35. I'll be mentioning in the comments, so it will be very easy for the students to remember. These are summaries of standards on auditing, like flowcharts. I'm not giving you the whole thing. And very honestly speaking, most students, they just revise the summaries and flowcharts of standards on auditing one day before, because it's not possible to read the standards in detail. Let's revise in the shortest possible way. SA315. So what did we mention? We mentioned that the auditor will use knowledge from other engagements. He will use knowledge from previous audits, right? He will discuss the analytical review procedures which he has adopted within the team. He will study the entity and he will study the environment of the entity. Regarding the entity, he will study the industry to which it belongs, the regulatory laws, the nature of accounting, financial policy, business risks, etc. And for the culture of the entity, he will study the cultural environment, the ethical environment, the information system, controls, risk assessment, activities, will monitor. So all this form part of your environment. And of course, with all this, there is an association of risk. So the auditor will check whether there are any significant risk, there are any information technology risk, and there are revision of risk. Now, in significant risks, again, you'll have to make two parts. You'll check whether if there's a complex transaction, so that will have the risk of fraud, or if it's an incomplete or inaccurate transaction, that will have a different level of risk. And for revision of risk, you will have to make a provision at the assertion level, and all this has to be documented along with the what else will you document? Engagement team, engagement partners, the key members who are involved, any other significant or material matters which you come across, all have to be documented. Okay, so because of the limitation placed by YouTube for 15 minutes, that is, if I exceed it, the video will get cropped, and the other standards are a little big, so will not suffice in this existing period of time. So I suggest you review all the standards which I put part by part. After every video, I'll be providing links to previous parts as well as link to future parts. So it will become very easy for you to memorize. So those who are following another textbook like Vinod Agarwal for auditing are also benefited. Vinod Agarwal is a little bigger book. So how you should plan your studies before your exam? First, do all your standards from your textbook like Surbhi Bansal, like I have revised, or you may refer other textbooks if you like them. But after that, it's very important to see the standards which are given by the practice manual. Please get the revised practice manual from the institute, and so that you have to know how to apply these standards on auditing. Because if you don't know how to apply, it becomes very difficult. So once you memorize from here, when you read the practice manual, you may just see the case and you may see the number of the essay, but you don't need to read the explanation because you've learned a different explanation from Surbhi Bansal, and you can just blindly write down what you learned from Bansal. But you should know what standard applies to which case. That is very important. And also the RTP of the previous attempt and the current attempt are very important for May and November Final CA examination students. All the best. See you in the next part. Thank you.